So my name is Luiz Aberbuj. I'm 32 years old. I work nowadays as the Jewish Diaspora Educational Coordinator of Breaking the Silence. And I'm originally from Brazil. I was born in southern Brazil in a city called Porto Alegre. There we have the third biggest Jewish community in Brazil, which doesn't make it really big, right? We have just a few thousand Jews living there. And in this context, I grew up pretty much involved in the Jewish community. I studied in a Jewish school. I grew up in a synagogue from the conservative movement, which they are called conservative only in the theological views. They are very liberal and progressive. Very nice movement. And it was a big deal to my family, all this issue of Jewish identity, connection with Israel. And I grew up inside of this context, but definitely the most impactful element was the youth movement. So I grew up in a youth movement, in a Zionist socialist youth movement. And there, it's the place where I say that there I started my politicization. I started to be a questioning person, and to really started to engage with everything that's going on here. And of course, through the youth movement, I studied a lot about the conflicts, the war, the occupation, and started to really get involved in the reality that we have here in Israel-Palestine. I came in Israel to the first time I was 18 years old. It was 2011 for a gap year program where I studied a lot, and suddenly all this connection with the land and with Israel made sense. And then I said, okay, maybe I'll be willing to live here in the future. And also during this program was the first time I heard about Breaking the Silence. So I remember that since then I had this presentation and all this questioning around the reality and the security and Palestinians and occupation. And I remember that the presentation really got stuck in my memory, and was a very touching moment during the program. After the program finished, I came back to Brazil. I stayed working in the youth movement and in the Jewish community for more 2 years. And then in March 2014, I decided, okay, now I'm going to Israel this time to stay and to live there, to fulfill my Jewish connection with the land, and to be this good Zionist boy that I am. And I arrived in Israel in March. So, of course, then I knew that by this age, we have the question of the army, right? And I knew that the army, they would call me. I was 21 years old when I arrived here. But in my mind, it wasn't even a question, right? I was pretty much willing to serve and willing to protect Israel. I was very proud of that. I have a lot of symbolism around my draft, because I'm the first member of my family that served on the IDF. So I was pretty much involved and willing to do that, even though I was pretty much critical to the occupation. And of course, I grew up in this Zionist socialist, very progressive narrative that we want two countries for two people. We want peace. We must achieve peace. And I had this also a little bit of this Navy mindset that the Palestinians, they are aggressive, they are terrorists, they hate us, they are anti-Semite. So we unfortunately do what we have to do, right? And during my service, I start to ask a lot of questions about what we are doing, how is that promote security, how that is even moral, right? Why we're entering this house and there's only a normative family there, why I'm stopping this guy, what he did, from where the information come, why the settler is giving orders to my commanders and influencing the military chain of decision making, even though he's a civilian, right? So all these questions start to really bother me. And I met a reality in where I saw a lot of separation, a lot of poverty, a lot of problems that remind me a lot of social problematics that I criticized all my life when I was in Brazil, right? The fact that the Palestinians are under this military dictatorship, something that to all Latin Americans is very touching. So these questions start to really bother me, but for me the moment that it broke the camel's back, it was the moment where I saw myself stopping children in the streets of Hebron and checking their bags, just to make sure that I'm doing my mission in the way it's supposed to be, and to make sure that I'm protecting people and that nothing's happened. And then I found myself stopping children that just came from the street, from the school to the street, and I started to check their bags. I remember that moment. I wasn't trying to be violent. I didn't want to scare the children. In my mind, I was like the moral soldier, right? I'm a progressive guy, so I just wanted to make sure. But that moment that really bothered me, and I understood that I didn't came to do that. I came to become a soldier, to protect Israel, and to arrest terrorists, not to be this kind of policeman that enables a policy of segregation between two people. And that moment, together with all that questioning, it what motivated me to reconnect with Breaking the Silence, and then also give my testimony and join the struggle against the occupation. And since then, I participated in a lot of different projects, even in a short documentary about Hebron, which is me and 5 more soldiers that served there, talking about our experiences in the city. And then I started to work in Breaking the Silence a few years ago. We are an organization of veterans from the IDF. We serve in the occupied territories, and after our service, we start to again ask all these questions about this reality and the policy that's being applied on the territories. And the organization was established in 2004 after the Second Intifada, which was a very violent period here in Israel and in Palestine. A lot of settler violence, army violence, but also a lot of terror attacks here in Israel. So it was a terrible time for everyone. And this group of soldiers that served in the Nahal Brigade, in the 50 Battalion, they were serving in Hebron during this time. And they found a huge gap between the reality that they were dealing with in Hebron, the missions they were doing, the orders they were receiving, and what the Israeli society were talking about and believing it's happening in the West Bank. So they decided to bring this reality to generate this public debate within the Israeli society. And they met a lot of violence, they met immoral orders, they met settlers and land grabbing and a lot of difficult scenarios. And they had this idea to do this photo exhibition in Tel Aviv with pictures that they took themselves and also testimonies that they collect from one another to present the Hebron reality to Israeli society. That in their opinion, they were not willing to talk about, not really understanding what's going on, or simply believing, following the official narrative that everything is to security. And that's the question that they started to ask themselves. Is everything security? After the exhibition, they started the project of collecting testimonies from soldiers, and then they started to understand that actually it's not only security. Exists an agenda here, a very fanatical and a very religious-based agenda led by Israeli settlers and the state of Israel with their army applying this reality. So they understood that the things doesn't need to be like that, right? And it can be changed. And in the end, all the occupation in itself is a policy. It's a policy that Israeli decision makers are deciding to not decide and letting the problem keep going. And in this scenario, in this chaotic scenario, they can change things on ground and generate this new reality that they want, which is a very messianic fundamentalist interpretation of Israel in itself. So our objective is to finish the occupation, to generate this debate, and to promote educational questioning and educational events and lectures and tours to Hebron, to the South Hebron Hills, and pretty much to bring this reality to Israeli society, to Jewish people abroad also. We really believe they are involved in that. And with the final objective to end the occupation, and hopefully that will lead us to a peaceful path through coexistence and diplomacy and peace. When October 7 happened, it was very surprising and terrible, and like I didn't know what to expect. I remember that I woke up with the sirens in the morning, and I remember that I turned on the television and I saw 50 people were killed. And I thought, like, it was insane, like 50 people, that's absolutely absurd. How something like that happens? And suddenly I saw that the number was growing, and didn't stop. So I understood that, okay, something huge is happening. They will call me and from the army for my reserve duty, and I will go there. I had this I didn't serve in reserve duty before. I had this kind of complicated relationship of getting liberations and try to not serve again. But in October 7, I really felt the pressure. I felt like something huge is happening, and I felt that it was a legitimate war, right? We were attacked. They had our hostages. They caused a lot of a scenario. The terrorists, like by they I mean the Hamas terrorists, right? They caused this very chaotic scenario, and a lot of people were killed and violence and a very terrible situation. So I felt like, okay, I need to do something. And a few hours later, my commander called, and in my mind, I was, okay, we are going to enter Gaza, right? We're going to fight inside Gaza. It's terrible, but that's the scenario. But then my commander called, and he said that we were actually be posted at the Urim base, close to the Kibbutz Urim, which is 12 kilometers from the border. And as I said in the beginning, I really believe that we are doing something legitimate. We'll bring our hostages back. We are reassuring the security for here in the border. But the time passed, and I was so close of the border, and I could hear and see almost everything that was going on in close to our area. And you start to think about what each boom represents, where the bombs are falling. When you start to think about the demographics of the Gaza Strip, like 2.3 million people, like more than a half of them, they are 18 years old or less. And you start to ask, like, all this carpet bombing, how does this bring us the hostages back? All the destruction we are promoting there. Also felt in the base and in general in Israeli society that the dehumanization discourse started to become very prevalent. Like it was ministers and leaders and the society in general talking about very terrible things about Palestinians not being human beings, about that they need to be transferred or that they need to be killed, that any one of them is innocent. And of course, that together with that, a lot of religious fundamentalist interpretations that try somehow to legitimize this perspective, which is absolutely fanatical, right? But the society in general, like the government abused their pain, right? People were in pain, people were traumatized. We have this terrible scenario, and the government pushing this kind of revengeful narratives. All this together, I started to ask myself, like, what we are really doing here? And then suddenly we start to see settler movements talking about resettle Gaza. Ministers supporting these movements. Ministers talking about transfer and talking about that the only way is to resettle Gaza and establish the segregation there again. And this was in the beginning of the war, right? So I started to understand, okay, something is very stinky here, and it's not simply the hostages, and it's not simply the security, but for the government, they were making this political use of the scenario to promote their own interests. And doesn't matter to them that we have hostages, that thousands of people were killed, that Palestinians are also human beings that have rights. So they're not interested in that. They're interested in fulfill their messianic interpretation of the reality. And that drove us to the scenario of almost 500 days of war. We still have hostages. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is something I never saw that was even possible. And this must be stopped. Definitely must be stopped. We started receiving testimonies from the October 7th since the October 7th itself. We had a lot of partners and friends and supporters from the Gaza envelope, from communities of the Gaza envelope, So a lot of them, they really also were attacked and needed to deal with this day. But of course, the testimony collection it takes time. Like, I think that in general, the soldier takes to the soldier himself to a lot of time to process what he lived, what he saw, the orders he applied, the reality that he dealt with during his service. And in general, when you finish the army, you don't want to speak about that, right? You want to forget that. You were tired, you were hungry, you did things you didn't want to do for a long time. So when you finish that, you want to live your life, you want to start studying, you want to travel with your friends, to be with your family. But a lot of people still have this moral questioning about what we are doing, what is that. So I think it in general takes a little bit of time. And also when we receive the testimony, we have a very serious and very tight process to verify the testimonies, that they are not something that anyone invented, that they are real stuff that happened, and we have how to do that. And so it takes time. We already started to publish a few testimonies. We have published and also connected the testifiers that were willing to show themselves and talk about specific issues. So we helped to connect them to the media, to promote their voices around the war. But we are still receiving, and we have a lot of soldiers that are still in Gaza or still serving in the West Bank or in other regions. We have people that are serving like almost 500 days, like since October 7th. There are people that are still on uniform serving. So things will take a little bit more time. But what we already published about the tortures in this Detaman military base, about the extermination area close to the Netzarim corridor. We have testimonies of soldiers talking about the killings of civilians in those areas. And we will keep publishing, always will keep publishing the voice of the soldiers to show the Israeli society that unfortunately we cannot blindly believe our politicians. They have their own interests and they lie sometimes, and we really need to ask ourselves in this very historical moment which kind of society and country we are willing to be. I believe that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is a very big issue, a huge issue, very, very important. Inside of the context of the conflict, we have the context of the occupation, right? And I pretty much believe that what's happening here, it's not a local issue anymore, right? What happens in Israel and Palestine is by definition an international conflict. A lot of countries, a lot of very wealthy country, very rich country, the very powerful countries, they are involved in everything that's going on. If it's the US, if it's Iran supporting Hamas, if a lot of people, Germany buying and sending arms to Israel, a lot of countries are involved. So we're talking about an international debate, and it's not something that we can try to keep here inside and talk only between Israelis and Palestinians. It doesn't work like that. And I believe that also international interests that they're being promoted here, right? One hand washes another one. But it's very important from the level of the state and leadership and politicians until the level of civil society to organize and to talk about it and to generate this pressure. And between Palestinians and Jewish people around the world, it's very important to generate this bridging, right? We don't need to be enemies. We need to make this bridging, to connect between people so we can talk. I hear your pain, you hear my pain. I hear your narrative, you hear my narrative, and then we can build something new. And I think that because of the world nowadays so much radicalized, polarized, social media and communication having this revolution and making possible this polarization of the world, it's turning us in enemies in a level that it's become it's becoming very, very hard to fight against. So it's very important. If you have Jewish friends, if you have Israeli friends, if you have Palestinian friends, let's talk about what's going on there. Let's talk about the occupation. Let's talk about terrorism. Let's talk with all the elements that we need to talk so we can change that, right? And I pretty much believe that groups like yours is also it's a very good example on how of things that we can do to get interest, to get involved, to start to study, to really understand, right? To understand that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not black and white. It's not Palestinians against Israelis, but we can generate something new. We can generate a new reality, and it can only be reached through conversation, diplomacy, respect, and peace. That's the only way.